A woman stood abandoned at a bus stop in the pouring rain, clutching her feverish 6-year-old daughter against her chest. But the man who had just walked away, her husband, had no idea he'd left behind a billionaire mogul who owned a massive real estate empire worth over $3 billion. Emily Richardson watched her husband of 8 years, Derek Richardson, climb into a taxi with his pregnant mistress, but what he couldn't see was the discreet security detail positioned across the street, their earpieces crackling with urgent messages about protecting one of America's wealthiest women. The child in Emily's arms burned with fever from her rare blood disorder, but Derek had refused to delay his departure even 5 minutes to help get their daughter to the hospital, choosing instead to prioritize his mistress's spa appointment. 20 minutes passed as Emily stood there in deliberate stillness, her designer clothes hidden beneath a worn coat. But then the distant rumble of engines announced something that would shatter Derek's world forever. A fleet of 7 Rolls-Royces appeared around the corner, their polished black exteriors gleaming despite the rain, but Derek had already turned back, compelled by a sudden, inexplicable urge to retrieve the watch he'd forgotten. What Emily did in the moments that followed wouldn't just devastate Derek, but would systematically dismantle everything he thought he knew about power, wealth, and the woman he'd so carelessly discarded. But how had a woman who commanded billion-dollar real estate transactions across 43 states remained invisible to her own husband for nearly a decade? But what secrets had Emily protected behind her carefully constructed facade of middle-class ordinariness? But what punishment awaited a man who had abandoned not just his wife, but the very source of everything he'd enjoyed for years? But would Derek ever recover from discovering the truth? Or would the revelation destroy him in ways that money could never repair? The rain fell in sheets that November afternoon, but Emily Richardson didn't flinch as cold water soaked through her threadbare coat to the skin beneath. Her daughter Lily trembled in her arms, the child's skin blazing with the fever that had started 3 days ago. But Emily's focus remained fixed on the taxi disappearing down Maple Street. Inside that taxi sat Derek Richardson, her husband, and beside him, Vanessa Hartwell, the 24-year-old receptionist from his accounting firm, whose swollen belly announced a pregnancy that Derek had finally, cruelly, admitted just an hour ago. "Mommy, I'm cold," Lily whispered, but her voice carried that weakened quality that sent ice through Emily's heart. Emily pulled her daughter closer, but she didn't move from the bus stop bench. Not yet. Her phone had already vibrated 3 times in her pocket, each vibration representing a message from Gerald Hastings, her head of security, but she'd instructed him to wait. She needed Derek to see. She needed this moment to be perfect. Behind the carefully maintained facade of Emily Richardson, struggling office clerk and devoted mother, existed something else entirely. Emily Charlotte Richardson Vandermeer, majority shareholder of Vandermeer Holdings, a real estate empire that owned 73 luxury hotels, 247 commercial properties, and residential developments across 43 states valued at over $3 billion. But Derek knew none of this. For 8 years of marriage, Emily had hidden her true identity behind false pay stubs, borrowed cars, and a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood. The deception had started for reasons that seemed almost quaint now, but Emily remembered the night she'd met Derek with crystalline clarity. 9 years ago, at a community center fundraiser in Brooklyn, she'd been volunteering. One of her rare evenings trying to feel normal, trying to escape the suffocating pressure of being Harrison Vandermeer's sole heir. Derek had approached her with genuine kindness, offering her coffee and conversation about nothing more complicated than local politics and shared hopes for the future. He'd seemed different from the fortune hunters and sycophants who usually surrounded her, but that was only because he had no idea who she really was. When he'd asked for her number, Emily had made a split-second decision that would define the next decade. She'd given him only her first and middle names, Emily Charlotte, but omitted Richardson Vandermeer. She'd told him she worked in property management, technically true but catastrophically incomplete. Their courtship had unfolded in dive bars and cheap restaurants, with Derek proudly paying for everything, despite his modest accountant salary. But Emily had felt something she'd never experienced among the country club set, the possibility of being loved for herself rather than her portfolio. The pregnancy had come quickly, too quickly, but Emily had been overjoyed. Lily's arrival should have been the moment Emily revealed everything, but her father's sudden death 3 weeks before her due date had complicated everything. Harrison Vandermeer had died without warning, leaving Emily to assume control of the empire while heavily pregnant and emotionally devastated. But she'd been terrified that revealing her wealth to Derek in that vulnerable moment would poison everything genuine between them. So, she'd waited. And waited, until waiting had become its own form of truth. But then Lily's illness had manifested. At 18 months old, their daughter had been diagnosed with von Willebrand disease, a rare blood disorder requiring expensive treatments, constant monitoring, and immediate medical attention during episodes. The medical bills that appeared on their insurance statements were modest, but only because Emily had quietly arranged for the hospital to bill her separately under her maiden name. Derek never questioned why their supposedly catastrophic medical debt never seemed to impact their daily lives, but his resentment about Lily's condition had grown like cancer in their marriage. "She's always sick," Derek had started complaining 2 years ago, but his tone carried accusation rather than concern. "This isn't what I signed up for." Emily had tried to explain that Lily's condition was manageable, that their daughter could live a full life with proper care. But Derek's interest in fatherhood had begun evaporating like morning dew. He'd started working later hours, missing doctor appointments, and forgetting to ask about Lily's treatments. The distance between them had widened from a crack to a chasm, but Emily had still believed something salvageable remained. Until Vanessa. 6 months ago, Emily's security team had presented her with photographs. Derek entering a hotel with a woman half his age, Derek kissing that same woman in his car, Derek shopping for jewelry at stores whose prices he supposedly couldn't afford. Emily had stared at those images for hours, but the betrayal had hurt less than the realization that Derek had been using her credit cards she'd carefully established in her Emily Charlotte identity, to fund his affair. Gerald Hastings, her silver-haired head of security who'd protected her family for 30 years, had offered to handle the situation, but Emily had refused. She'd wanted to see how far Derek would go. She'd wanted to understand who she'd really married. The answer had arrived today in their cramped apartment living room, with Lily burning up on the couch and Emily begging Derek to help get their daughter to the emergency room. "I can't," Derek had said, but his eyes had slid away from both of them. "I have something important." "More important than your daughter's health?" Emily had pressed, but she'd already known the answer. Derek had exploded then, 8 years of hidden resentments pouring out in a toxic flood. "I'm tired of this. I'm tired of the medical bills, the constant worry, the life I never wanted. Vanessa's pregnant, Emily, with a healthy baby, a normal baby. I'm leaving, and I'm not coming back." Emily had absorbed each word like physical blows, but what had shattered her completely was what came next. Derek had demanded she hand over her purse. He needed cash, he said, but his fingers had closed around her wallet with practiced greed. Then he'd ordered her out of the apartment entirely. "I'm bringing Vanessa here tonight," he'd announced, but his voice had carried no shame, no hesitation. "Take the sick kid and wait somewhere else. Give me a few hours to move my stuff." "Derek, Lily needs a doctor," Emily had started, but he'd cut her off. Figure it out yourself. You always do. Then, he'd called the taxi, instructed Emily to wait at the bus stop around the corner, and told her he'd text when she could return. That had been 47 minutes ago. Now, standing in the rain at that bus stop, Emily finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her rage. Not the hot, explosive anger that led to screaming and thrown objects, but the cold, calculated fury that had built empires and destroyed competitors. Derek had made his choice. He'd chosen his comfort over his child's life. He'd chosen a mistress over his wife. But most unforgivably, he'd chosen cruelty when compassion cost him nothing. Emily's phone buzzed again, but this time she answered. "Gerald." "Ma'am, we're in position. All 7 vehicles are ready. The legal team is standing by, and the documentation you requested has been filed with the courts." Gerald's voice carried that crisp military precision that had served him through 2 decades of Marine Corps service before he'd joined Vandermeer Holdings Security. "And the timing?" Emily asked, but she already knew Gerald would have executed her instructions perfectly. "Derek Richardson left your apartment 6 minutes ago. According to our surveillance, he's returning, apparently forgot his Rolex. He'll arrive at your location in approximately 90 seconds. Emily smiled, but the expression held no warmth. "Excellent. Execute Operation Revelation." She heard Gerald relay commands to his team, but then his voice softened. "Ma'am, if I may, are you certain about the full scope? Once we proceed, there's no containing this." "I'm certain," Emily said, but her eyes dropped to Lily's flushed face. "He abandoned his sick child at a bus stop in the rain, Gerald. Whatever humanity he might have once possessed is gone, and I want the world to see exactly what kind of man Derek Richardson really is." "Understood, ma'am. Vehicles are moving now." Emily ended the call, but her attention shifted to the street. In the distance, she could hear them. The deep, throaty rumble of 7 Rolls-Royce engines, approaching in perfect formation. The Phantom 8 models she'd commissioned last year, each one customized with bulletproof glass and armor plating typically reserved for heads of state. Together, the fleet represented over $5 million of automotive engineering, but more importantly, they represented undeniable, irrefutable proof of who Emily really was. The first vehicle appeared around the corner, but Emily had timed everything perfectly. Derek's taxi had just pulled back up to the curb, and she watched her husband emerge, fumbling with his wallet to pay the driver. He hadn't noticed the approaching convoy yet, his attention focused on his phone, probably texting Vanessa about how successfully he'd disposed of his old family. But then the first Rolls-Royce pulled up directly in front of Emily, its presence impossible to ignore. Derek's head snapped up, but his expression showed only confusion. The second vehicle arrived, then the third, forming a protective semicircle around the bus stop. By the time the 7th car slid into position, Derek's confusion had transformed into stunned disbelief. Gerald emerged from the lead vehicle, but he wasn't alone. 6 additional security personnel fanned out in practiced formation, all of them former military, all of them wearing earpieces and the kind of tailored suits that cost more than Derek's monthly salary. Behind them, Emily could see a second wave arriving, 2 black SUVs containing her legal team, led by Patricia Morrison, the attorney who'd successfully defended her company against hostile takeover attempts by 3 major corporations. "What the hell is going on?" Derek demanded, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. His eyes darted from the cars to the security detail to Emily, who remained seated on the bench, still cradling Lily. Emily stood slowly, but she transferred Lily to Gerald's arms with practiced ease. The security chief accepted the child with surprising gentleness, immediately wrapping her in a thermal blanket that had been warming in his vehicle. A pediatric specialist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who Emily kept on permanent retainer, emerged from the second Rolls-Royce and began examining Lily immediately. "Emily," Derek tried again, but now fear contaminated his confusion. "Who are these people? What's happening?" Emily stepped forward, but she paused to shrug off the threadbare coat she'd worn as costume. Beneath it, her Valentino suit, custom-tailored, worth $12,000, emerged like a butterfly from a cocoon. She reached up to remove the drugstore glasses she'd worn for years, revealing eyes that had stared down billionaire investors across conference tables. Her hair, usually pulled into a modest ponytail, fell loose around her shoulders as she removed the elastic band. The transformation took seconds, but Derek stumbled backward as though she'd struck him. "Who are you?" he whispered. But the question revealed how little he'd ever truly seen her. "I'm Emily Charlotte Richardson Vandermeer," she said, but her voice carried a steel that Derek had never heard before. "Majority shareholder and CEO of Vandermeer Holdings. My company owns the building where you work, Derek. We own your boss's building. We own 47% of the commercial real estate in this city. The portfolio is currently valued at $3.2 billion. Derek's face had gone white, but Emily wasn't finished. "That apartment you just ordered me out of? I own it. I own the entire building, actually. Purchased it 4 years ago through a subsidiary. The furniture you're planning to rearrange for your mistress? I bought it. The car you drive, leased through one of my companies. The credit cards you use to wine and dine Vanessa, all connected to accounts I control." Patricia Morrison stepped forward, but she carried a tablet displaying financial records, property deeds, and corporate documentation. "Mr. Richardson, every asset you've considered yours for the past 8 years has been, legally and financially, controlled by your wife. The modest lifestyle you thought you were both living, that was her choice, her protection of you, her attempt to see if you could love her without knowing about the money." Derek's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Emily watched him process the information, saw the moment comprehension crashed through his denial. His eyes widened as memories recontextualized themselves. The medical bills that never actually impacted their finances. The apartment that stayed affordable despite rent increases everywhere else. The opportunities that seemed to appear whenever he needed them. "You lied to me," Derek finally managed, but the accusation rang hollow even to his own ears. "I protected myself," Emily corrected, but her voice remained level. "When we met, you loved Emily Charlotte, the property manager who volunteered at community centers. You proposed to a woman you thought earned $40,000 a year. And for 8 years, I tried to be that woman because I believed, foolishly, that you loved me for something real." "But you should have told me," Derek started, but Emily's raised hand silenced him. "Should I have told you before or after you started complaining about Lily being too expensive? Should I have revealed my wealth before or after you started working late to avoid coming home to your sick daughter? Should I have shared my true identity before or after you decided that a 24-year-old receptionist was preferable to a wife who'd given you 8 years of devotion?" Vanessa had emerged from the taxi during this exchange, but her designer purse, purchased with Derek's credit card, which meant purchased with Emily's money, hung conspicuously from her shoulder. The young woman's eyes darted between the Rolls-Royces and Emily, calculation replacing confusion on her face. "Derek, baby, who is this woman?" Vanessa asked, but she stepped closer to him, one hand protectively covering her pregnant belly. Emily's gaze shifted to the mistress, but her expression remained cold. "I'm the woman whose money paid for the necklace around your neck, the highlights in your hair, and the prenatal vitamins you're taking. I'm also the woman whose husband you've been sleeping with." Vanessa's face flushed, but she recovered quickly. "Derek told me he was divorced. He said—" "He lied," Emily interrupted, but she pulled a folder from Patricia's outstretched hand. Just as he's been lying about everything else. Derek, shall we tell Vanessa about your gambling debts? The ones you accumulated at the casino and attempted to hide? Or should we discuss how you've been embezzling from your own accounting firm to maintain the lifestyle you thought you deserved? Derek's face transformed from white to gray. You knew about that? I've known everything, Derek. I've had investigators documenting your activities for 6 months. Every hotel room, every forged expense report, every dollar you stole from clients who trusted you. Emily's voice remained steady, but fury burned beneath her control. I was prepared to offer you a quiet divorce, generous terms, a settlement that would have let you keep your dignity, provided you remained a present father to Lily. But, Derek whispered, but he already knew where this was going. But you abandoned your 6-year-old daughter, a child with a serious medical condition, at a bus stop in the rain because you couldn't be bothered to delay your affair for 1 hour. Emily's voice finally cracked, but the emotion was pure rage. You looked at your sick child and chose your mistress's spa appointment instead. Patricia stepped forward again, but this time she presented legal documents to Derek directly. Mr. Richardson, you're being served with divorce papers. Mrs. Richardson Vandermeer is seeking sole custody of your daughter based on abandonment and child endangerment. Additionally, you're being served with notification that your employer has been informed of your embezzlement activities. Criminal charges are pending, and you'll want to secure legal representation immediately. Derek's hands trembled as he took the papers, but his eyes remained locked on Emily. You're destroying me. No, Emily said, but she moved closer until they stood mere inches apart. You destroyed yourself. You destroyed our family when you chose selfishness over fatherhood. You destroyed any future we might have had when you walked away from Lily while she was suffering. I'm simply ensuring the world sees you as you truly are. Please, Derek whispered, but tears now streamed down his face. I made a mistake. I was stressed, confused. You were cruel, Emily cut him off. There's a difference between making a mistake and consciously choosing to abandon your sick child in the rain. You made that choice, Derek, and choices have consequences. Behind them, Lily's voice rang out, stronger now, responding to whatever treatment Dr. Chen had administered. Mommy? Emily immediately moved to Gerald, but she took her daughter back into her arms. Lily's fever had already begun breaking, her color improving with proper medication and care. I'm here, sweetheart. Mommy's here. Where's Daddy? Lily asked, but her innocent question silenced everyone present. Emily's jaw tightened, but she chose her words carefully. Daddy had to go away, baby, but Mommy's going to take care of you. We're going to go somewhere safe and warm, and you're going to feel so much better. Derek made a strangled sound, but when he tried to step forward, 2 security officers immediately blocked his path. That's my daughter. That's the daughter you abandoned, Gerald said quietly, but his military bearing made the words cut deeper than any shout. You lost the right to claim her when you walked away. Vanessa had been standing frozen during the entire exchange, but now she pulled at Derek's arm. Derek, we should go. This is insane. Oh, but we're not quite finished, Emily said, but she directed her attention to the mistress now. Vanessa Hartwell, born in Seattle, moved to New York 3 years ago, currently receiving public assistance despite your salary because you've been fraudulently claiming to be a single mother. The pregnancy you're carrying? Based on the timeline, it began while Derek was still very much married and living with his wife and daughter. Vanessa's face went white, but Emily continued mercilessly. You've been receiving money from Derek, my money, under false pretenses. You were aware he was married. You encouraged him to abandon his sick child. And now you're going to discover what happens when people target my family. You can't prove, Vanessa started, but Patricia held up her tablet. Text messages, photos, witness statements. We can prove everything, Ms. Hartwell. You'll be receiving your own legal documents shortly. Fraud charges likely, and Derek's financial support. Consider it terminated since every dollar he gave you was stolen from either his employer or his wife. Vanessa's composure cracked completely. She turned on Derek with sudden fury. You said you were divorced. You said she was nobody. You said we were going to have this perfect life. He lied, Emily repeated, but there was almost pity in her voice now. He's very good at lying, as I learned over 8 years of marriage. But here's something that's not a lie, Vanessa. That baby you're carrying deserves better than Derek Richardson as a father. Trust me on that. Derek had sunk to his knees on the wet pavement, but his body shook with sobs. The man who'd walked away so confidently an hour ago had completely shattered. Emily, please, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'll do anything. There's nothing left to do, Emily said, but she moved toward the lead Rolls-Royce with Lily in her arms. You made your choice, Derek. You chose to walk away from your family. You chose cruelty over compassion. And you chose to reveal exactly who you are when it mattered most. Gerald opened the car door, but before Emily climbed inside, she turned back one final time. I spent 8 years trying to be someone you could love without the money. I convinced myself that wealth was what made people see me as an object instead of a person, but I was wrong. Money didn't make you selfish, Derek. Money didn't make you abandon your sick daughter. You did that all on your own. The apartment, Derek gasped, but desperation colored every syllable. Where am I supposed to go? Figure it out yourself, Emily said, but she deliberately echoed his words from earlier. You always do. She climbed into the Rolls-Royce, but Patricia remained outside to handle final details. Through the window, Emily watched Derek collapse completely, his body racked with sobs as the reality of his situation crashed down. Vanessa stood apart from him now, her phone already out, probably calling someone else, already moving on to her next target. Gerald slid into the driver's seat, but his eyes met Emily's in the rearview mirror. Where to, ma'am? The penthouse at Vandermeer Tower, Emily said, but she pulled Lily closer. And Gerald, activate the full security protocols. I don't want Derek anywhere near Lily until the custody hearing. Already done, ma'am. I've also taken the liberty of alerting your PR team. This will hit the news by morning. Abandoned wife revealed as billionaire mogul. They're preparing statements. Emily nodded, but her attention remained on her daughter. Lily had drifted into peaceful sleep against her chest, the fever finally broken, color returning to her cheeks. This child, this beautiful, brave little girl, deserved so much better than what Derek had offered. As the convoy of Rolls-Royces pulled away from the bus stop, Emily allowed herself one look back. Derek remained on his knees in the rain, but Vanessa had already disappeared, abandoned him just as quickly as he'd abandoned his family. Poetic justice, perhaps, but Emily felt no satisfaction in his suffering. She felt only relief that Lily would grow up free from his toxicity. The fleet moved through the city streets in perfect formation, but Emily's mind was already moving forward. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, press conferences, and the complex process of completely disentangling her life from Derek's. The divorce would be swift but brutal. She'd ensure he received nothing beyond what the law absolutely required, and even that felt too generous. But more importantly, tomorrow would begin a new chapter for Lily and herself. No more pretending, no more hiding behind false names and modest apartments. Emily Richardson Vandermeer would step fully into her identity, but this time with her daughter by her side, teaching Lily that wealth was a tool, not an identity. That power came with responsibility. That love, real love, had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with showing up when it mattered most. Derek had failed that test spectacularly, but Emily had passed it simply by being present. by protecting her daughter, by choosing Lily's well-being over convenience, over comfort, over everything else. The Rolls-Royce pulled up to Vandermeer Tower, 73 stories of glass and steel, the crown jewel of Emily's empire. But unlike the cold monument Derek might have imagined, the penthouse awaiting them had been carefully prepared as a home. Lily's favorite toys, her medical equipment, everything she needed. More importantly, it had security that would prevent Derek from ever hurting her again. As Gerald helped them from the car, Emily looked up at the building bearing her family name. For years, she'd hidden from this legacy, convinced that showing it would poison everything. But Derek had taught her a valuable lesson in the worst possible way. The right person would love her regardless of wealth, and the wrong person would reveal themselves eventually, regardless of how much she hid. "Ma'am," Patricia said, approaching with her tablet, "the custody filing has been processed. Given Derek's abandonment today, combined with his financial crimes and the documented evidence of his neglect, the judge has granted an emergency temporary sole custody order. Derek won't be able to see Lily without supervised visitation." "Good," Emily said, but her voice was firm. "Schedule the visitation for 6 months from now. He needs time to face consequences. And Patricia, I want a full forensic audit of every dollar Derek spent over the past 3 years. Every dinner, every hotel room, every gift. I want Vanessa to see exactly what kind of man she tied herself to." Patricia smiled grimly. "Already underway, ma'am. The accounting team is quite thorough." Inside the penthouse, Emily settled Lily into bed, but the child stirred as Emily pulled the covers up. "Mommy, are we going home tomorrow?" "We are home, sweetheart," Emily said, but she stroked Lily's hair gently. "This is our home now, and it's safe and warm and everything you need is here." "What about Daddy?" Lily asked, but her eyes were already closing. Emily hesitated, but she chose honesty over comfortable lies. "Daddy made some bad choices, baby. He needs to learn how to be better. But you and me? We're going to be just fine. Better than fine. We're going to be amazing." Lily smiled sleepily, but her next words stopped Emily's heart. "I know, Mommy. You always make everything okay." Emily waited until Lily had fallen completely asleep before allowing her own tears to fall. 8 years of marriage, of hiding, of trying to make something work with someone who'd never truly seen her. 8 years of protecting Derek from the knowledge that might have changed him, but not in the ways she'd hoped. He would have become dependent, entitled, weak. Instead, she'd given him the chance to love her without wealth complicating everything, and he'd failed, catastrophically, unforgivably. But as Emily stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city her family's empire helped build, she realized something profound. Derek's betrayal had freed her. No more hiding, no more pretending to be less than she was, no more apologizing for success or power or the ability to protect her daughter with resources most people couldn't imagine. Her phone buzzed, a text from Gerald. "News vans are assembling outside. PR team recommends a statement by morning. Also, Derek has been formally terminated from his firm. Criminal investigation is proceeding." Emily typed back, "Statement will emphasize child abandonment. I want the world to know he left a sick 6-year-old in the rain. Let his mother see what her son really is." She sent the message, but then she put the phone away. Tomorrow would bring media storms and legal battles and the complete destruction of Derek's reputation. He'd likely face criminal charges, financial ruin, and the knowledge that he'd discarded a family worth billions for an affair with a receptionist who'd already abandoned him. But tonight, Emily simply stood in her penthouse, listening to her daughter's peaceful breathing, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: freedom. Derek Richardson had abandoned his wife and sick child at a bus stop, but in doing so, he'd set them both free from his toxicity. The fleet of Rolls-Royces that arrived hadn't just shocked him. They'd revealed the truth he'd been too blind to see for 8 years. And what Emily had done, what she would continue to do, would leave him devastated forever. Because the worst punishment for a man who'd discarded a billionaire mogul, thinking she was worthless, living with the knowledge of exactly what he'd thrown away and knowing he'd never, ever get it back. Emily smiled at her reflection in the window, but this time the expression held genuine warmth. Tomorrow, the world would know Emily Richardson Vandermeer's full story. They'd see the empire she'd built, the daughter she'd protected, and the strength she'd hidden for far too long. But tonight she was simply a mother who'd chosen her child over everything else. And in the end, that was the only identity that truly mattered. The rain continued falling outside, but inside Vandermeer Tower, inside her real home, Emily and Lily were finally completely safe. And Derek Richardson, he was exactly where he deserved to be, alone in the rain, drowning in consequences of his own making, devastated forever by the magnitude of what he'd lost. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vandermeer Tower's executive conference room, but Emily Richardson Vandermeer barely noticed as she reviewed the quarterly reports. 3 years had transformed everything, but the changes ran deeper than mere numbers could capture. "Mom, Dr. Patterson says my blood counts are perfect again." Lily's voice echoed from the doorway, but the 9-year-old's energy was infectious. She burst into the room wearing her private school uniform, her face glowing with health that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago. Emily looked up from the reports, but her smile was immediate and genuine. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Does this mean you're cleared for the ski trip next month?" "Yes." Lily pumped her fist in victory, but then her expression turned more serious. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Emily set down her pen, but she gave Lily her complete attention. "Always." "Jessica's dad asked why my last name is different from yours. I told him you use your full name for business, but he seemed confused." Lily climbed into the chair across from Emily, but her legs swung with nervous energy. "Should I just tell people the whole story?" Emily considered the question carefully, but she'd learned that honesty, age-appropriate honesty, served Lily better than protective fiction. "What do you want to tell them?" "The truth, I guess," Lily said, but she picked at the edge of her folder. "That my dad made bad choices and isn't part of our lives anymore. That you're a CEO who built an empire. That we're doing great without him." "Then tell them that," Emily said, but she reached across to squeeze Lily's hand. "You don't owe anyone your entire story, but you never have to hide who we are either. We've done nothing wrong." Lily nodded, but then she brightened. "Oh, I almost forgot. Uncle Gerald said the new children's hospital wing is opening next week. Are we still going to cut the ribbon?" "We are," Emily confirmed, but the Lily Richardson Pediatric Treatment Center, funded entirely by Vandermeer Holdings, represented one of Emily's proudest achievements. Specialized treatment for blood disorders, completely free for families who couldn't afford care. "And you're giving a speech, remember?" Lily groaned dramatically, but her eyes sparkled with excitement rather than dread. I know. Use your voice to help others, like you always say." "Exactly," Emily said, but movement in the hallway caught her attention. Patricia Morrison appeared, followed by Gerald Hastings, both wearing expressions that suggested news, significant news. "Ladies, I apologize for interrupting," Patricia said, but she carried her ever-present tablet. "Emily, we need to discuss a development regarding Derek Richardson." Lily's expression immediately shuddered, but Emily noticed the tension in her daughter's shoulders. "Lily, sweetheart, why don't you head down to the car? Gerald will take you to school and I'll see you tonight for dinner." "Is it bad news?" Lily asked quietly, but her maturity sometimes startled Emily. "I don't know yet. Emily answered honestly, but she wouldn't lie to protect Lily from reality anymore. But whatever it is, we'll handle it together. We always do. Lily hugged Emily tightly, but she whispered, "I'm glad he's not here, Mom. Is that wrong?" Emily's heart clenched, but she stroked Lily's hair. "No, baby, it's not wrong to be glad you're safe and happy. That's never wrong." After Gerald escorted Lily out, Patricia settled into the vacated chair, but her expression was complicated, neither pleased nor displeased, something in between. Derek Richardson was released from prison yesterday. He served 18 months of a 3-year sentence for embezzlement, got early release for good behavior. Emily absorbed the information, but she felt surprisingly little. No fear, no anger, just a distant acknowledgement of facts. "And he's requested visitation with Lily," Patricia continued, but she pulled up documentation on her tablet. "Through his attorney, naturally. He's claiming he's rehabilitated, wants to be part of his daughter's life, says prison gave him perspective." Emily's jaw tightened, but her voice remained controlled. "What does the law say?" "The custody agreement allows for supervised visitation if Derek completes substance abuse counseling, maintains steady employment, and demonstrates sustained rehabilitation for a minimum of 6 months," Patricia recited, but she looked up from the screen. "He's been out for 24 hours, Emily. He hasn't met any of those conditions yet." "Then the answer is no," Emily said flatly, but her mind was already running through contingencies. He abandoned Lily at a bus stop while she was dangerously ill. He chose his mistress over his daughter's medical emergency. Prison doesn't erase that. "Agreed," Patricia said, but she hesitated. However, his attorney is preparing to file a motion arguing that Derek's been denied access to his child for 3 years. They're going to claim you've poisoned Lily against him using your wealth and influence. Emily laughed, but the sound carried no humor. "My wealth and influence? The wealth he didn't know existed until his own cruelty revealed it? The influence I've used to ensure Lily has the best medical care, education, and stability possible." "I'm on your side, Emily," Patricia reminded her gently, but her expression softened. "I'm just preparing you for the argument they'll make. Derek's going to play the redemption card. Broken man finds himself in prison, wants to make amends with his daughter. Wealthy ex-wife is keeping them apart." "What happened to Vanessa?" Emily asked suddenly, but morbid curiosity had gotten the better of her. Patricia's lips twitched with something that might have been amusement. "Vanessa Hartwell gave birth to a son 2 years ago, but DNA testing revealed Derek wasn't the father. She'd been sleeping with at least 2 other men during the same period. Derek learned about this while in prison. Apparently she sent him a letter confessing everything, possibly hoping he'd feel less attached to the child, and therefore less obligated to her financially." "Karma," Emily murmured, but she felt no satisfaction. So Derek lost everything: his wife, his daughter, his freedom, his mistress, even the child he thought was his. "I almost feel sorry for him." "Almost," Patricia agreed, but she leaned forward. "Emily, what do you want to do about the visitation request?" Emily stood and walked to the windows, but her reflection stared back at her. A woman transformed from the one who'd stood at that bus stop 3 years ago. She'd stopped hiding her wealth, stopped apologizing for her success. Vandermeer Holdings had expanded by 40% under her full-time leadership. Forbes had named her one of the most powerful women in American business. She'd testified before Congress about real estate reform and fair housing practices. But more importantly, she'd become the mother Lily deserved. Present, honest, strong. "I want to talk to Lily," Emily said finally, but she turned back to Patricia. "She's 9 years old now, old enough to have opinions about her own life. If she wants to see Derek under supervised conditions, after he's met all the legal requirements, I won't stand in the way. But if she doesn't want to see him, I'll fight any court order with every resource I have." Patricia nodded approvingly, but she made notes on her tablet. "That's the right approach. Child-centered, legally sound. I'll prepare our response to his attorney." "What's Derek doing for work?" Emily asked, but she was curious despite herself. "Apparently he's working at a call center," Patricia said, but she consulted her notes. "Making about $30,000 a year. He's living in a studio apartment in Queens, sharing space with 2 roommates. His mother sends him money occasionally, but from what our investigators have learned, even she's kept him at arm's length since his crimes became public." Emily tried to imagine Derek, who'd once complained about having to take the subway, crammed into a studio apartment working for barely minimum wage. The man who demanded she leave her own apartment so he could move his mistress in now couldn't afford a 1-bedroom of his own. "He made his choices," Emily said quietly, but she felt no triumph. Every single step of the way, he chose selfishness over responsibility, comfort over character, and now he's living with those consequences. "Do you ever regret hiding your wealth from him?" Patricia asked. But the question was personal rather than professional. 3 years of working together had created genuine friendship between them. Emily considered the question seriously, but she'd asked herself the same thing countless times. "I regret staying as long as I did after I saw who he really was. I regret not leaving the moment he started complaining about Lily being too expensive. But hiding my wealth? No. That revealed his true character in ways nothing else could have." "He might have been different if he'd known," Patricia suggested, but her tone indicated she didn't truly believe it. "He would have been worse," Emily corrected, but certainty filled her voice. "He would have been entitled, demanding, convinced he deserved my money, simply by virtue of being married to me. At least this way, I know exactly who Derek Richardson is, without wealth complicating the picture. He's a man who abandons sick children when they become inconvenient. That's his core nature." A knock at the door interrupted them, but Gerald's head appeared. "Emily, sorry to interrupt again, but there's someone here to see you, says it's personal." Emily frowned, but her security protocols were strict. "Who?" "Derek Richardson's mother, Margaret," Gerald said, but his expression suggested he'd already conducted a thorough screening. "She's unarmed, came alone, and seems genuinely distraught. She's asking for 5 minutes of your time." Emily exchanged glances with Patricia, but curiosity won over caution. "Show her in. But stay close, Gerald." "Always, ma'am," he replied, but he disappeared briefly before returning with an elderly woman whose resemblance to Derek was unmistakable. Margaret Richardson had aged considerably since Emily had last seen her at the wedding 8 years ago, but grief and shame had clearly taken their toll. She clutched a worn purse, her clothes clean but dated, her posture radiating discomfort. "Mrs. Vandermeer," Margaret began, but she stumbled over the name. "Or is it Mrs. Richardson Vandermeer? I'm sorry, I don't know the proper—" "Emily is fine," Emily interrupted gently, but she gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Can I offer you coffee? Water?" "No, thank you," Margaret said, but she perched on the edge of the chair, as though afraid to fully commit to staying. "I won't take much of your time. I know you're busy, important. I needed to say something before Derek's attorney starts causing problems." Emily sat across from her former mother-in-law, but she waited silently for Margaret to continue. "Derek called me yesterday after his release," Margaret said, but her hands twisted her purse strap. "He told me about wanting to see Lily, about how he's changed, how prison made him a better man. He asked me to talk to you, to plead his case, to tell you he deserves another chance." "And what did you tell him?" Emily asked, but she kept her voice neutral. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but her voice strengthened with emotion. "I told him no. I told him that what he did to you and Lily was unforgivable. I told him that if I were you, I'd never let him within 100 miles of that precious child again. The confession hung in the air, but Emily felt unexpected sympathy for this woman who'd raised a son capable of such cruelty. I failed as a mother, Margaret continued, but now tears spilled down her cheeks. I raised Derek to think he was special, that he deserved things without earning them. His father and I spoiled him, made excuses for his selfishness, blamed everyone else when he made mistakes. And when he married you, I was so relieved someone was willing to take him on. I didn't question why a beautiful, intelligent woman would choose my mediocre son. Margaret, Emily started, but the older woman held up a trembling hand. Please let me finish. I need to say this. Margaret took a shuddering breath, but she looked directly at Emily. When Derek went to prison, when the full story came out about what he did, abandoning Lily at that bus stop while she was so sick, I was hospitalized for 3 days, stress-induced heart problems, not because my son was in prison, but because I finally had to face what kind of man I'd raised. Emily felt her throat tighten, but she remained silent. I've spent 3 years thinking about that day, Margaret said, but her voice broke. My granddaughter, burning with fever, and my son just walked away, ordered her mother to wait in the rain like garbage he was discarding. And for what? For a woman who was using him? For an ego so fragile he couldn't handle having a child with special needs? It wasn't your fault, Emily said quietly, but she meant it. Derek made his own choices. But I taught him it was acceptable to make those choices, Margaret countered, but steel entered her voice. Every time I excused his selfishness, every time I blamed his teachers or his bosses or his friends for his failures, I taught him that consequences didn't apply to him. And Lily paid the price for my failure. Patricia shifted uncomfortably, but Emily leaned forward. Margaret, why are you here? What do you want from me? Permission, Margaret said simply, but she pulled an envelope from her purse. Permission to see Lily, not with Derek, never with Derek, not unless she wants that someday, but I'd like to know my granddaughter if you'll allow it. I've set up a trust fund for her medical care. It's not much, only about $50,000, but it's everything I've saved, and I want her to have it. And I'd like to apologize to her if she's old enough to understand. Emily took the envelope, but inside she found documentation for a legitimate trust fund in Lily's name, along with handwritten letters addressed to both Lily and Emily. You want to apologize to Lily for Derek's actions? I want to apologize for not being the grandmother she deserved, Margaret corrected, but her voice steadied. For not visiting when she was sick, for not questioning Derek's complaints, for not seeing that my son was failing as a father. I can't undo what Derek did, but I can try to be better moving forward if you'll let me. Emily studied the woman before her, but she saw genuine remorse, not the performative kind that sought absolution, but the deep, painful kind that came from authentic self-examination. What does Derek think about you being here? He doesn't know, Margaret admitted, but something like defiance crossed her face. And I don't care what he thinks. For 3 years he's been calling me from prison, telling me how unfair his sentence was, how you used your wealth to persecute him, how everyone turned against him for one mistake. He's learned nothing, Emily. He's still the selfish boy who blamed everyone else for his problems. Then why show up now? Patricia interjected, but her attorney instincts had engaged. Why not reach out years ago? Shame, Margaret said simply, but she looked at Patricia directly. I was ashamed of what my son had done, ashamed I'd enabled him, ashamed to face Emily after everything. But last night, when Derek called demanding I plead his case, I realized I had a choice. Continue enabling his victim mentality or finally do the right thing. Emily felt something shift inside her, but it wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It was possibility. "Margaret, I appreciate you coming here, truly, but I need to talk to Lily before I make any promises. She's been through trauma because of Derek's abandonment. If seeing you would hurt her, I can't allow it, no matter how genuine your remorse." "I understand," Margaret said, but she stood to leave. "I'm not asking for immediate access. I'm asking for consideration. If Lily ever wants to know her father's side of the family, I'd like to be there for her, not as Derek's mother, but as her grandmother who recognizes she deserved better." "I'll think about it," Emily promised, but she also stood. "And Margaret, the trust fund is generous, but Lily's medical care is fully covered. If you'd like to contribute to something meaningful, the Lily Richardson Pediatric Treatment Center always needs funding for families who can't afford care." Margaret's face crumpled with emotion, but she nodded vigorously. Yes, I'd like that very much. A way to honor what Lily's been through while helping other children." After Margaret left, Emily stood at the window again, but her mind whirled with complications. Derek wanted back into Lily's life. His mother wanted to make amends, and Emily had to navigate all of it while protecting her daughter from further harm. "That was unexpected," Patricia said finally, but she'd been unusually quiet during Margaret's visit. "Life is unexpected," Emily replied, but she thought about the journey from that bus stop to this moment. 3 years ago, I was standing in the rain, watching my marriage end and my daughter suffer. I thought my world was ending. "And now," Patricia prompted gently. "Now I realize it was beginning," Emily said, but certainty filled her voice. "Derek's betrayal freed me to be who I really am. His abandonment forced me to stop hiding, stop apologizing, stop pretending to be less than I am. He gave me the greatest gift possible, though he'll never realize it." "What gift?" Patricia asked. "The truth," Emily said simply. "The truth about his character, about my own strength, about what really matters. Money didn't make Derek leave. His own selfishness did. Wealth didn't make me a good mother. Love did. Everything else is just details." Her phone buzzed. A text from Lily sent during her morning break at school. "Mom, I wrote a poem about you for English class. Can't wait to show you tonight. Also, can we have pizza for dinner? Love you, infinity." Emily smiled, but warmth flooded through her. This simple text from a happy, healthy, thriving child, this was what mattered. Not Derek's attempts at redemption, not media coverage of her empire, not Forbes rankings or quarterly reports, just Lily, happy, safe, loved. "Patricia, prepare a formal response to Derek's attorney," Emily said, but she turned from the window with renewed purpose. "He can submit his request for visitation through proper legal channels after meeting all the custody agreement requirements, not before. And make it clear that Lily's wishes will be paramount in any decision." "And Margaret?" Patricia asked. "I'll talk to Lily tonight," Emily decided, but she collected her things. "If my daughter wants to know her grandmother, I won't stand in the way, but that's Lily's choice, not mine, and certainly not Derek's." As Emily prepared to leave for her next meeting, a presentation to the City Council about affordable housing initiatives, she paused at a photograph on her desk. Lily at the ribbon cutting for the pediatric center, beaming with pride, holding oversized scissors as flashbulbs popped. Behind her in that photo, barely visible but always present, stood Gerald and Emily's security team, her chosen family, the people who'd protected them when Derek had failed. 3 years had passed since the fleet of Rolls-Royces arrived at that bus stop, but Emily no longer needed 7 vehicles to prove her worth. She knew who she was, a mother who'd chosen her child over convenience, a businesswoman who wielded power responsibly, a survivor who'd transformed betrayal into breakthrough. And Derek was exactly where his choices had led him. Alone, struggling, desperately trying to reclaim what he'd so carelessly discarded. But some things, once thrown away, could never be recovered. Some bridges, once burned, left only ashes. Emily had rebuilt her life from those ashes, but she'd created something stronger, truer, and infinitely more valuable than what she'd lost. And every day she got to watch Lily grow into a remarkable young woman who understood that strength came not from hiding who you were, but from embracing it completely. That evening, as promised, Emily and Lily shared pizza in the penthouse, but Lily read her poem aloud, a heartfelt tribute to mothers who protect their children, who show up when it matters, who turn pain into purpose. When Lily finished, Emily's eyes were wet with tears, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Mom?" Lily asked, but concern creased her features. "Did I make you sad?" "No, baby," Emily said, but she pulled Lily close. "You made me grateful, so incredibly grateful." "For what?" Lily asked, but she snuggled against Emily's side. "For you," Emily said simply, but she kissed the top of Lily's head. "For this life we've built together, for second chances and new beginnings, for everything." And in that moment, with her daughter safe in her arms and the city lights twinkling below, Emily Richardson Vandermeer understood a profound truth. Derek's abandonment hadn't devastated her forever. It had liberated her forever, and that made all the difference. The fleet of Rolls-Royces had shocked Derek, but what Emily had built in the aftermath, a life of authenticity, purpose, and unshakable love, that was what would last forever. And Derek, he'd spend the rest of his life knowing he'd walked away from something irreplaceable, something priceless, something he'd never understand or deserve. But that was no longer Emily's problem. She had a daughter to raise, an empire to build, and a future that shone brighter than any fleet of luxury cars ever could. And that, Emily thought, as Lily drifted off to sleep beside her, was the best revenge of all.